guys, welcome to episode 69 of Accidents on Trial. Cannot believe it's been that many episodes already. Let me know if you guys can hear me okay. And as always, in case I run into any technical issues, I'll restart the stream, but it should be fine. I'm hoping to have a new setup here by Tuesday, which should be more reliable. And also, J Mike should be coming back Friday or Saturday. And we'll have definitely a more consistent schedule at that point. He had some scheduling issues he had to resolve and stuff like that. I hope you guys can hear me okay. Let me know if my sound is having any problems at all. For this episode, I want to kind of on a very surface level, get into some ideas about gender and some conversations that I've been having with people in my personal life, and kind of what my current understanding of these topics are, and definitely hear some feedback from you guys, and also we can have an open discussion as well if I run out of things to say about it, because again, I'm only now starting to educate myself on some of these issues. So but before I do that, I do want to address something unrelated, which was just brought to my attention, which I do need to talk about. I don't know if you guys are aware of this app called Clubhouse, which I think is similar to a previous app called Stereo, where people just basically, it's similar to Discord as far as talking on audio, setting up some kind of like chat room and talking about different topics and that kind of thing. Tom Rabbit has a YouTube channel where he exposes a lot of Darth Dawkins kind of ridiculous and bullying behavior online. And I think one of his minions, I think his name is the Enlightened One or some nonsense like that, set up a room impersonating J Mike. And Tom immediately realized that this wasn't the real J Mike, but other people didn't and were fooled by this kind of trolling, which to me, I'm all for trolling, but when you cross the line of actually impersonating another person, I think that's extremely creepy and immature and just like a whole another level of I find it embarrassing. And it wasn't even a good attempt. Like, he did something nothing like him. It wasn't even he wasn't even really trying to impersonate him beyond just saying, "Oh, I'm J Mike." And so I find that to be particularly pathetic. So I want to lay out a challenge, not that I actually think that these cowards will accept it, but one to this Enlightened One, come on the show, debate us. Let's see how that goes for you. And same thing with Darth. Like, even though I have no respect for either of you intellectually, like, I'll give you a platform to spew your scripts, and I will not interrupt you while you do it. If you think you're capable of actually engaging in a adult conversation with another person, by which I mean you don't interrupt when someone is actually responding to your little script, and actually allow for a conversation to take place beyond just screaming over the other person and throwing insults over the other person, then I'll give you a platform and where we can engage. I don't think you'll ever do that. I think the only reason why you got any notoriety is because people, I guess, find it amusing to see people yelling at each other and are into that kind of drama. Outside of your minions that I think are even more pathetic than you are a laughing stock to anybody else that watches your video and listens to your nonsense. But in spite of that, I'm willing to give you a platform where we can attempt to have a conversation. I don't think you'll accept. I don't think you're capable of an adult conversation. You just project your insecurity onto everybody else. But I'm willing to give you that chance. And same thing with this Enlightened One who thinks it's funny to go impersonating other people. So yeah, so I just want to get it out of the way because I found that really odd. Um, Now, with that said, let's get into the actual topic of conversation for tonight, which is this notion of gender versus the notion of sex, biological sex. Um, and I want to start out by saying that I am quite ignorant of this topic at the moment. Like, this is really more of like a um, sounding board for kind of what my current thoughts, as I'm just beginning to study some of the literature that's out there and having conversations with the trans community and so forth about some of these issues. So I'm very open to arguments and evidence and different perspectives. My positions are fairly pliable at this point. So this is just my intuitions at my very early stages of engaging with these issues. And let me start out by saying that, from my perspective, all people deserve equal rights, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of gender identity, as long as obviously you're not violating somebody's consent, you're not going after children. Like, that should be without saying. Um, I don't consider something like pedophilia a sexual orientation. I consider it a mental illness, and that is not equatable by any means to being on the LGBTQ plus spectrum or gender identity. My current perspective on this topic is the following. I'm not by any means convinced that gender is actually a real thing. I think it's one thing to say that there are certain tendencies, perhaps, that may be in some way like on a spectrum and partially dependent on biology. Like, I think sex is a real thing. And I don't think even with sex it's a binary, because I think there are intersex people. In fact, there are much larger amount of the population people think. There are as many intersex people as there are people with red hair, as far as I understand it. It just their experience has been kind of silenced by society and kind of the binaries that the society has put in place, where they've tried to kind of fit these people into boxes that they don't necessarily belong to. My perspective certainly is not meant to invalidate people's experiences. However, I think my duty to some degree, especially being what I'm doing here, is to challenge perspectives. And so I'm trying to think of how to go into this, because I recently had a conversation with at a lunch after a close friend of mine defended her thesis, with two professors who are in their gender studies. That's what they teach, and one of them is a trans person, and it seems to me that some of their perspective is contradictory. Like, on one hand, the trans community seems to want to suggest that the binary is a construction, and the binary, when it comes to gender expression, is illusory. And I agree with that notion. But then on the other hand, there's almost a sort of falling into these binaries. It's one thing to say, I feel like I was born in the wrong body. But that's perfectly fine. And I think they should go through whatever they need to go through to resolve that anxiety. If it's taking hormones or having changing, getting plastic surgery, whatever will make you feel like your gender identity and your body corresponds to your gender identity. I'm all for that. What I don't understand is what is even meant by manhood, or what is meant by womanhood. Uh, is there anything that goes beyond the social constructions that makes these concepts? Is there anything inherent to these notions? Anything of the kind of essentialism, like, my phenomenological experience as a man is intrinsically different than that of as a woman, beyond sort of the social inequalities that we can all acknowledge exist. So obviously, being a woman in society, you're not going to be treated the same as what is viewed as a man in society. There's a real difference there in how much the different sexes and genders are paid, the different kind of bullying that they face, and the violations of rights that they have to go through. Obviously, there's a clear difference there. But these are differences that are cultural. These are differences that are social. They're not necessarily intrinsic to anything. Like, those society could have developed otherwise. And there were, in fact, societies in ancient times that had a focus on women. Like, women were the ones that had the social power, as opposed to the men in society. And so that those kind of dynamics seem to function differently. So the real sort of differences that we're observing now seem to be kind of contingent on different cultural factors, as opposed to something fundamental. And so, what do I mean by fundamental? What do I mean by my experience as a man or as a woman? Think about something as basic as this. Like, we are looking at a glass on the table. Just the brute phenomenological experience of what that means to look at a glass on a table. Where is the difference between a so-called man having that experience and a so-called woman having that experience? Some people leaning towards postmodern intuitions seem to want to suggest that we can't actually derive the meaning of the glass on the table without contextualizing it in a history of the social, political, and economic baggage that we are part of. So what it means, who's washing the glass, who made that glass, how that somehow there's a difference being a woman facing the oppression that one faces, looking at the glass. I don't, on a surface level, again, just having started my engagement with these notions, I think that's nonsense. I don't see how that could be the case. I don't think most people are looking at a glass and contextualizing it in a totality of their experience and definitions of other things, and this kind of endless context that keeps piling on itself. I don't think people operate that way. I think people look at things and at best have a function associated to certain objects that is to some degree culturally produced out of habits and observation. Like, I look at a glass and think, hey, liquid goes in there. That's as far as I think that goes, even for someone has a philosophy background and is used to going through the kind of deconstruction that we tend to go through, and being more self-aware and aware of the environment around us, and breaking down things that most people would take for granted. I think even then, I don't think that most people in philosophy look at phenomenology that way. Now, a book was recommended to me, which I forget the author of at the moment. I'll have to look it up, but the title of it is Queer Phenomenology. And that is something that I'm in the process of getting my hands on, And maybe in reading this literature that's out there, my perspective might change in the future. But as it currently stands, I don't really understand on what grounds gender can be said to have some essentialist feature. And to some degree, I fear that a lot of trans people, I think, end up transitioning more due to the fact that they recognize they don't fit these binaries, these social binaries. They don't fit what's expected from a man or a woman. So they feel alienated. They feel like they're not right in because they've bought into these constructions. They've bought into the idea that a man can't really wear a dress, or that womanhood is how one feels like when in a dress, or obviously there are women who can reproduce and there are women who can't. There are women with large breasts and women with small breasts. So womanhood, what does it mean to say that my womanhood or my manhood is sort of understood or experienced just through those descriptions? I don't think that has a lot of content. And when I ask sort of people who really think that there is such a thing as womanhood or manhood to explain what it is, like what is the feature of those concepts that is concrete, that you can point to a real objective difference. Again, I'm not talking about biological sex or whatever you got going on down there. Like, that's fine. That's a different thing. I'm talking about gender expression. Now, World Teacher asks if I'm absolutely certain of that. No. Like I'm saying, I'm not certain of anything at this point. That I'm just starting to engage in this conversation. So I'm not certain of anything. What I'm saying is that I'm asking questions to try to understand, for the people who think that there is a real difference in what is meant by womanhood, manhood, or transhood, whatever that means. Can you explain to me what those differences are? Because I'm trying to educate myself, and I'm certainly not trying to dismiss anybody's experience or certainly not take away anybody's human rights here. I'm just trying to understand what is meant by these terms. Like, I don't care about labels, but if I had to label myself anything, it would probably be non-binary, because just the very concept of gender doesn't compute in my brain. Now, Zachariah writes, the essentialist feature of gender is for identifying the opposite for procreation. Could you elaborate on that? Because I'm not sure I follow. It seems to me that procreation shouldn't really be a factor here, because there are women who can procreate and women who can't. There are men who are fertile and men who aren't. So why would procreation be an essentialist feature when you have people all over the spectrum who can't procreate yet still adapt some of these labels? It's just not something that I really comprehend there. And I wonder if we lived in a society where kind of these binaries and these black and white thinking and these constructions were kind of done away with, and if the norm was just to recognize that people are on a spectrum of behavior, in a spectrum of experience that's vast. Maybe I think we would live in a better world. I think people would feel less wrong in their own body. They would feel less pressured to change into the expectations of the opposite gender, because it wouldn't feel like as alienated. I think. Again, I'm not trans. I think I'm non-binary, so I don't. I don't really, fully grasp all this stuff. But if any of you guys have any feedback that you think might be helpful on this issue, or any work or of literature or any articles you can point to, feel free to kind of send those my way. Zechariah goes on to say, the vast majority of people are subconsciously physically attracted to a gender. Having gender norms facilitates the process. But here's what I'm confused about, because there are people who are called male who also have what is attributed to them as feminine features, and vice versa. There are women on all sides of kind of the body type that's out there, and that all kinds of people find attractive all over the spectrum. So I'm not sure that I quite understand what you mean by that. Physical attraction seems to be a very kind of vague thing that applies to a lot of different types of people. Like, even if you're saying, well, I'm just attracted to women, even that, what is meant by woman is going to be a pretty wide thing, a pretty wide category there. Now, just this is not, this is a kind of different issue, but this is also an open discussion about anything. So I do want to make sure that I address these other questions real quick. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name here. Newen? Newen asks, without Hume's problem of induction, do you think absolute certainty is warranted with empiricism? No, I think the only context in which I would ever claim to be absolutely certain of anything is that I exist. Because I can't be having an experience without existing. One entails the other. As far as everything else, even with empiricism, that's, everything that I could be experiencing could be a dream, right? So my empiricism is only going to get to a description of what kind of patterns I'm observing in that experience. But it's not going to give me absolute certainty of the nature of my experience. It's not going to give me absolute certainty that there exists an external world that is completely the same as I see it. It's not going to give me certainty about the other as necessarily being a consciousness separate from my own. So, yeah. Now, as far as Zechariah says, I'm sexually attracted to feminine people. I'm sexually repulsed by masculine people. Biological sex plays no role here. So I guess I think I have a less of an issue with terms like feminine and masculine, as long as it's understood that those are features expressed by both sexes. But again, I wonder how much content those terms are actually really expressing. I guess to some degree it's useful, like on a practical level, to be like, well, there's a difference between this kind of set of features and that kind of set of features. I just worry about the baggage that terms like feminine and masculine have, in the way in which they're tied into these other notions that I think may be toxic. But like I said, I'm pretty open to these ideas. Trying to see more in the chat here, what's being said. Hugs for 80th Century. Thank you for joining tonight. The world teacher writes, most persons are bisexual, even to a minuscule degree. Yeah, I think it probably makes sense. I don't really know. I do think most people are probably on a spectrum. I'm sure there's probably exceptions to that as well. And Zechariah writes, because femininity and masculinity is entirely culturally based, always have baggage. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I guess I wish there was a more concrete way to get down to what is really meant by these categories. But like I said, I'm definitely going to be doing more reading on these topics and see, expose myself to more of the current research that's been done on these issues. I mean, I think it's ironic that a lot of conservatives want to say that those who kind of embrace trans identity in the trans community are anti-science. So far, again, yes, my research has been limited, but so far my research seems to point otherwise, that science is entirely supporting this idea of different spectrums and gender notions being a sort of construction as opposed to a concrete biological category. And then, of course, again, I don't want to generalize. Like, definitely, I try to stay away from identity politics. I'm sure there are conservatives who are more rational than others and who wouldn't express this. But an unfortunate amount of conservative people that I've encountered have made this argument that, oh, well, the scientists who claim otherwise, well, they're just bought by the left, or they're buying into or expressing propaganda, or they're doing what they're doing for political reasons. And at that point, it's like I kind of lose the desire to have a conversation, because like now you've kind of set yourself up to your position being completely unfalsifiable, because you're just going to assume any evidence that you can bring against you. You're just going to whine about it being a liberal agenda. And so you have your own bias and wishful thinking there. You don't understand how science actually operates at that point. It's not to say that science is perfect. Obviously, there are issues, any kind of human endeavor there. How do you feel about parents raising children gender neutral? I think that's fine. I think people should be taught at a young age, especially if we're going to shift these constructions, that you don't have to feel like you need to do any one particular activity. You don't need to wear any particular type of clothing. You do what you feel, what makes you happy, as long as it's not self-destructive. I have some questions as far as sports. Like I do think that there are some biological differences that can impact how well someone of a certain sex might do in a sport. Mixed martial arts in particular. Like, yeah, of course, even there are going to be exceptions as far as strength and otherwise. But I do think that generally, I think men tend to be naturally stronger than women. And so if you're putting somebody who was born a male to fight a woman who was born a woman, biologically speaking, that may be an issue. Now, I don't know if the type of hormone treatments work enough to kind of undermine and resolve that potential difference there. And also, there's also the fact that sports are never going to be completely fair, because everybody is born with kind of different advantages. And so I don't really buy into that as well. That and this is I don't necessarily think that trans people should have their own category of sport events or anything like that. I'm pretty open. I want to address some more comments here in the audience. Sex, the state of being either male or female. An extremely minute percentage of humans are either hermaphrodites or of an intermittent sex. Yeah, but you can't believe in the binary. Like, those exceptions exist, and those exceptions makes it not a binary. And it's actually not as minute as you think. I think something like 30% of people, I think it was 30%. I may be wrong on the numbers. I'll have to look it up again. But are born intersex. I mean, there's as many intersex people as there are people with red hair. So you can't say that there are two sexes when there are intersex people. At the most, you can say there are three categories there. But again, gender and sex are not the same thing. Maybe there are ways in which sex impacts gender expression. And I do think that there are tendencies, like I think it's possible that, generally speaking, one sex may be more aggressive than another, and one may be more diplomatic than another. But again, all of that is going to be on a spectrum. It's not going to be a clear category. I think these are kind of generalizations that are useful in the way in which we can talk about society and human experience. But we have to be careful to kind of buy into them in a way that's too strict. Let me scroll down to see. World Literal says every mammal has a gender. I'm also not positive that's true. I think that I read there are certain. Well, I'm thinking of something that's not a mammal. I would have to go back, but I thought that I had read somewhere that there are some species that can actually change their sex, but or that have both sets. But again, I'm not very knowledgeable when it comes to this kind of thing. Zachary writes, sex characteristics do impact gender expression. Example, beard style. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes more sense. I think, yeah, I don't know. I think it's definitely an interesting topic for sure. I'm just very skeptical of those that want to make something like gender be something that's kind of essentialist. Like there's an actual clear-cut reality to what it means to be that. That goes beyond a spectrum. Like, I mean, there are some women that have more body hair and may have beards if they don't shave because they have their hormones are what they are. I don't know that we would be tempted to say they're not a woman, right? Or that they suddenly don't feel like a woman. We might say that they have what we normally think of as masculine features, and that's fine. I think that makes more sense to me. But yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that these things to me seem to be far more ambiguous than I think a lot of people imagine them to be. Like I said, because it's only me here tonight. This is probably going to be a shorter show. I just wanted to jump on real quick and share some of his thoughts. Like I said earlier, I'm definitely skeptical of the idea that when we're having the most basic phenomenological experience of just engaging with the world on a subject-to-object relation, that we are at the same time bringing on all the baggage that we have as far as our social, political, historical identity. But if I'm looking at a glass, I think I'm looking at a glass. I don't think I'm looking at a glass as all these other categories. And maybe I'm wrong, but let's see. Titan says, gender does not equal sex. That amounts to medical misinformation. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't think that it does. I think they're two separate issues, and I think people confuse the two. And especially, unfortunately, people on the right, but also I think sometimes some on the left. I think it's unfortunate that I think the same binaries that people in the trans community are fighting against, they end up in some way embracing. They're kind of, and I guess maybe it's hard for people to not end up kind of buying into these social norms because they're everywhere, right? And how does one divorce themselves from that baggage of culture? I think it's incredibly easier for people on the autistic spectrum to do this. I wonder how many people who are non-binary are also somewhere on the spectrum there. I know that I probably am on the spectrum, and I think in some ways that makes it easier to not really feel this attachment to culture in that same way. I'm just speaking for myself, but Titan also writes, also the idea that there are only two sexes biologically is an urban myth, believed only by those whose last science class was in the 6th grade. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think at the very least, there seems to be 3 different sexes, intersex, male and female. But even then, I think there are more than that, from what I'm gathering here. But again, this is a conversation that I'll definitely expand upon as I learn more about it, as I do more reading, as I talk to more people in the community to try to understand their experience. And none of my perspective certainly is meant to invalidate anybody's experience. It's just that when you tell me that you feel like a woman or that you feel like a man, I would like an explanation as to what that means. And where the objective difference lies in between the two experiences beyond what we can point to social inequalities, social constructions, that I think definitely exists there. Hold on one moment. Okay. I was getting a message. Yeah, what was I going to say? But yeah, if you guys... Zachariah writes, in biology, sex has many different characteristics. Yeah, I would love for you to share some of your knowledge about that. I think that would be great. If you guys have any question, just feel free to ask me about anything, really. I'm not sure that I have a lot more to say currently, because, like I said, this is just kind of my initial thoughts. But I'm definitely open to what you guys think. CJ asks, on a completely unrelated note, do you think communism is taking over the US? If so, are there recent policies that make you think that? If not, what do you think makes you think that? No, I think, I don't think, I mean, obviously, you're going to find individuals who are communist or who buy into that philosophy. I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. Somebody is delivering groceries to my building. They're having trouble finding the number. Just give me 1 second. I apologize. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Okay, to answer your question there. No, overall, I don't think that communism is spreading. I think socialism more so. I think people are starting to recognize that capitalism as it exists right now is a cancer. It's not sustainable. I think the middle class, I think, is dying, is suffering extremely because of the wealth inequalities that are present. And there are a lot of myths about capitalism, like this idea that it's this perfect system of what's it called? Innovation. I think it's complete bullshit. I think so much of capitalism is just clones of itself. I don't think that it's. I mean, there are positive aspects to it. I'm not saying throw it out altogether, but I do think that a hybrid between socialism and capitalism needs to be met. And yes, Zachariah writes, the US is becoming more socialist. The reason for socialized medicine infrastructure is to prevent civil unrest. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Awad writes, what do you think about sexual orientation as a spectrum instead of just two extremes? That is, I think gender is a spectrum. Yes, I agree with that. I do think that gender is a spectrum as well. Awad, your username is familiar. I wonder if you're who I think you are, or if I may be confusing you with somebody else. I'll have to double check there. Have we engaged on TikTok by any chance? Because if so, those exchanges weren't the most civil. But I think I'm probably confusing you with somebody else. Let's see. Titan writes, it's more fair to say the fascism is on the rise in the US, and anyone trying to stop it is being strawman as a communist. Yeah, I think that makes more sense. I think there's a lot of social unrest and a lot of misinformation being thrown out there, and people just are so reactionary and misinformed and driven by intuitions and groupthink as opposed to actually. This is why I think that teaching philosophy and critical thinking is so important in every aspect of life, especially in politics. Okay, cool. I'm glad about it. Yeah, I think your username is similar to one that I found, but I'm glad you're not the same person. You seem to be quite polite. Actually, I'll address it real quick in case the person I was referring to is watching, which they're probably not. But it's funny, on this show, I try to create an environment of respect and patience and positive interaction. I do think that sometimes it's hard, especially if the other person is coming into it not in good faith. I think there are a lot of really intellectually dishonest people out there who, when pressured, when their beliefs are pressured, they'll resort to really poor tactics to kind of evade the actual argument. There's a lot of egos out there, and I'm noticing that as I grow older, I'm becoming less patient with that kind of behavior. I'm becoming less capable of just focusing on finding common ground with people who see the world differently than I do, which I think is so important in the betterment of society. But when I met with someone who has all this arrogance that's completely unearned, and they want to spout what they think they know is true without actually being able to defend that, or even understanding what should constitute as evidence, I find myself reacting in a way that is probably toxic to that kind of behavior, especially if they're adding onto the narrative that gay people are going to hell, or that trans people are going to hell, or the non-believers are going to hell. Like, I don't know how to navigate that in a way that may be more constructive, where I may be more likely to change your mind if I met someone that with compassion, as opposed to telling them to go F themselves. I recently engaged with someone on TikTok who supposedly is a philosophy professor, at least claims to be so. Which it's fine. Like, I'll take their word for it. But who their understanding of philosophy, especially moral philosophy, for someone who is said to be a professor, is so non-existent. I mean, the arguments they're making are outdated by centuries. I mean, it's embarrassing. And yet they go on lecture like they're some kind of expert and that everybody else is beneath them. I asked them to debate me, and they're like, "Well, you don't. You're just like, you're just a kid without any credibility who's just whining on the internet." I'm like, I'm a 32-year-old man about to be 33 with a degree in philosophy, whose family has a history of actually having philosophy professors and scientists, and who has worked very hard to learn about these things. So what? Just because I don't have a published paper yet, because I haven't actually sent anything, means that I don't have any credibility? It's just lame excuses. A lot of people, I think, are cowards. I think a lot of people feel safe hiding behind a keyboard, and are actually not really willing to engage in real time with an audience watching. And I see that a lot from the Muslim community on YouTube. They have no problem. Like, yes, Mike and I do clip breakdowns, but we also bring religious people on to talk with them, and we try to make it fair. It's not 6 of us against one atheist, or one Muslim, which was what they do on their channels. It's not. We don't bombard our guests with question after question and talk over them. We try to really give people a chance to speak their mind and what they think is true about reality, and then we'll give a response and have a back and forth. Even when it's Mike and I with one guest at the same time, we try to make it as fair as possible, where we give them more time than we might take. So I don't see the same at all from the Muslim community of YouTube. And again, there's another context in which I see an incredible amount of arrogance with sort of no understanding of reality. There's a complete detachment. Like, I watched a video last night talking about gender here of this Muslim who was preaching to his group about how one day in the future scientists and anthropologists will look at our current understandings of gender taking place on the left as mythology. This is coming from someone who believes in miracles. This is coming from the same person who thinks that Muhammad flew on a winged horse, lecturing about the trans community believing in mythology. I mean, it's the level of projection and delusion from these people is embarrassing. And they'll come up with their videos. And in fact, next week I have a whole list of ones that I'm going to go through. But they'll have their little videos talking about how to live in an atheist mind rent-free, and questions that no atheist can answer. And it's the same bullshit that they always do, the same questions that philosophy and atheists have been answering comfortably for a century. And it's just really pathetic. And they'll never, or very rarely engage in actual debates. Certainly not on atheist shows. I'll go back to what are they called? The Adventure Brothers Time Podcast Brothers, or the hell they're called, who had a conversation. We did a couple breakdowns of this, where they got completely annihilated to the point where they had to change their definitions halfway through the conversations, and then went on social media pretending like they had owned the physicist and owned the philosopher. Like, just the level of dishonesty there is so embarrassing, and yet their audience eats it up. Yeah, so that was a little bit of a sidetrack there, but let me see what's taking place in the chat here. Let me see. Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about those things. I think like I said, I think it seems to me from the research I've done that on questions of gender, and even on the question of sex, everything is very nuanced. There are not this clear, completely concrete distinctions and definitions. So that's currently my position on that topic. Sorry, there's a lot of dead air here. I'm trying to read and process everything that's being said. I'm hoping that Mike can join us again starting Friday or Saturday. It's definitely easier when I'm not by myself here. But I hope I'm not rambling too much, and that what I've been saying makes sense to you guys, and that you're enjoying the content. As always, if you'd like to support what we're doing, the Patreon page is a great start. Patreon.com/Axioms on Trial. We're in the process of figuring out how to actually make content in there and be active in that format. I think it'll be easier very soon to do that. And then, of course, liking and subscribing the videos. Any kind of donations goes right, makes life easier for us to continue making videos and actually putting food on our table and all that. Let's see. Creator asks, what's your take on anti-natalism? I'm not super well read on it. I think, I understand the concern with overpopulation and the concern that there are ways in which it is unethical to kind of bring people up in a situation that is so toxic. That said, I think they take it way too far. Like, obviously, it is part of human well-being and happiness, for the most part, obviously not for everybody, but for many, to start families. And I think that the solution isn't so much anti-natalism. I think the solution is shifting the values of the culture to to actually caring about the environment, caring about our food being ethically produced, caring about the other, as opposed to purely individual benefit and particularly financial. I think if there was a cultural shift towards higher empathy on a social level, and actually engaging in our environment in an ethical way, then things would be very different. But yeah, I think it's definitely problematic. I can't believe I've been going for an hour already. If you guys have any clips that you would like me or Mike or both of us to break down, or if you have any advice on how to bring you guys better content, please feel free to leave that in the comments or email us at axonsontrial@gmail.com. I was very moved recently by an email that we received from someone telling me that what we're doing has been very helpful in their deconstruction and moving away from theology. And that's what you want to hear from, when this is why we do this, in the hopes that we can affect somebody's life in a positive way. It makes me want to keep going with what we're doing, for sure. Awad, I definitely agree with that sentiment. He writes, thanks for sharing thoughts. Most Islamic theists have the worst tactics for debating. It's hard and frankly impossible to engage with them sometimes. Yeah, obviously, I think a lot of theists on all sides do this. The difference is that I think Christianity and other religions seem to have gone through our reformation. Yes, of course, you're going to get your occasional nut job, and you're a conservative Christian who doesn't believe in evolution and has never even bothered to actually do any kind of research outside of Fox News. Like, you get those idiots. But overall, you have more progressive Christians who are engaging in a more intelligent conversation. When I hear Muslims talk about morality, talking about the kind of the failing of the West when they make excuses for child marriages, when they make excuses for pedophilia and slavery, when they make excuses for rape, and that's what they do most of the time. It's just laughable. These are not intellectuals; they're cowards. And any Muslim listening, you're welcome to come on the show and engage with me. The amount of times where I've asked Muslims to come on and they've refused is very telling. So let's see. Ewan asks, do you think Christianity and Islam are essentially Platonism? I think in some ways. I think there's certainly aspects of that. But I think there are probably some aspects of Platonism, probably the way that I look at some things. I think all religions function in similar ways, in the way in which they teach a lack of critical thinking, in which there's inherent bigotry within the texts. But I also think that socially, not all religions are having the same impact. I think some are more dangerous than others, currently speaking. Let's see. Zachariah writes, I think it would help with very hostile guests to have a whiteboard to access a concise, specific claim without distraction or misdirection. Yeah, and I think I'm trying to get better at keeping it on topic. I think when I had that 7-day calendar lunatic on there, I kind of played his game a little bit too much. Like I think I should, and I think it's because I kind of felt like it would have been boring to just kind of repeat the same fact, which is his whole thing was a non sequitur. But yeah, I think it's hard to engage with people who are just not intellectually capable or just haven't done the work. Like, I'm not going to name the name, but I mean, TikTok is a cesspool of idiocy. You want people that go in there and arrogantly say things like the Big Bang is just a theory, evolution isn't a fact, transgenderism is anti-science and is a liberal conspiracy. Vaccines are the government trying to kill us. Like, the level of just stupidity and ignorance on there, of course, is always expressed with the most arrogance. And yet, again, I think deep down they know that they don't have the tools to talk beyond their little echo chambers. Because I'll go and I'll comment, I'll ask, come on my show, engage with an actual physicist about the Big Bang, see how that goes for you. Engage with a biologist on evolution, see how that goes for you. Engage with a philosopher on morality, see how that goes for you. They run. They don't respond, or they make excuses. And it's just, just typical. So, having said that, my platform is open to most people, although I will, after the fiasco of the 7-day calendar lunatic, I will attempt to do a better screening of who I have on here. Because it's, occasionally the occasional dumpster fire shit show of an episode is fun, but it's definitely not something that I want to do on remotely on a regular basis. It will be like a once in a blue moon type of thing. So, do you guys have any other questions for me before I get going? Like I said, this is just a shorter show because I'm on my own right now. So, and like I said, you guys are always welcome to email us or leave comments. I know that sometimes comments, YouTube seems to think that comments that are not spam are spam. So if you've noticed that your comment didn't get published, try it again, or email me and let me know, and I'll read it on the channel. But just to close up here, just in the near future, I'm definitely going to be reviewing some other Islamic videos, some other Christian videos. I'm also going to be looking to go into more like actual philosophy. I haven't yet decided who I want to start with. I might start with Descartes. I'll see. And also, I'm waiting to hear back from a number of potential guests that I would love to have on. So, having said all that, I'll answer a couple more questions. Quick question on gender. What are your thoughts on intersex individuals that receive surgery to their genitals to remove the less dominant ones? Like I said, for me, it's you do what you think you're comfortable with and want to do with your body. I think it's unfortunate when someone's experience of themselves and love for themselves is so shaped by the opinions of others and by the social expectations of others. I've been lucky in the sense that I care deeply about what the people close to me think, about the people who I respect and love and who I have an intimate relationship with think. I've never given a shit about people bullying me, whether it was when I was younger, having an accent, for example, or things people might say online. Like, who knows? Maybe that the same idiot that impersonated J Mike will try to do the same with me. Anybody can tell I have an accent, so I think that would be even harder to do. But I know who I am. I'm comfortable and confident in who I am for the most part. Random online, or not even just online, but the opinions and the expectations of other people is not relevant to me. So he elaborates in regards to the surgery being done shortly after birth. I mean, yeah, unless there is some kind of, it's hard because I think unless there's some kind of health danger, I don't think people should be having surgeries without being capable of consenting for surgeries themselves. I understand a parent concerned with how that their child may be viewed in society, but I think if they can kind of teach them to have the right values and confidence in themselves, they might not be as affected. But I don't know. I mean, it's obviously easier for me to say not being in a situation. CJ asks, do you have any plans in the near future to go over or have any guests focus on philosophy of language? Absolutely. Philosophy of language is one of my primary interests, and I'm actually I just emailed one of my professors and some other people as well who I know are well versed in philosophy of language, and I'm hoping to hear back soon. And I would love to go into philosophy of language. That's something that I'm definitely preparing myself to do, and so that will definitely be coming up. I mean, from my aspect of the future of the channel, I definitely want to engage more with philosophy, whether it's philosophy of mind, language, phenomenology. Those are the things that drive me the most, or interest me the most. But of course, we'll also continue to address religion and its failings when we can. Newen asks, have you ever approached religion from a Jungian psychological perspective? Do you think mythology has values that rational thinking does not in terms of well-being? No, I don't. That's a hard question because I'm okay with metaphor. I'm okay with stories having a sort of a moral lesson to them. So I'm not saying that from a rational perspective we should do away with symbolism or with storytelling or those things. I'm okay with that. The problem is that most religious people don't think this thing is metaphorical to something deeper. They take the stories as being factually true. They take those stories as actually having happened, as there actually being a God and a heaven and a hell. It's one thing to acknowledge mythology in its proper context and even deriving value from that context as part of a deeper, larger conversation. But I think most religious people are not doing that. Most religious people are just they're taught that these are the truths, that it's bad to question those truths, that without these rules and assumptions about the world, we would be lost. And I think that's really toxic and complete nonsense. I'd love to take that kind of approach to religion. It's just that it's not the way it's experienced most of the time in society. CJ writes, I get it since I'm getting away from philosophy of religion myself. As the same stuff repackaged. I'm interested in exploring more philosophy of mind, language, and politics. Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at as well. I think it's important to challenge religion because of still it has such destructive impacts on society, and I will always point that out and fight the level of bigotry and irrationality everywhere that I see it. But the conversations that get me going, that get me excited, are conversations about what is language and how does it relate to reality? What is consciousness and what can be said about it? What is meaning? What is meant by phenomenology? Like, what does it actually mean to be a subject engaging with the world? All those things I think are far more interesting to me. And I will definitely be able to engage with those questions on a deeper level on the show soon. My time, unfortunately, has been very limited because I'm still finishing up my degree, and that is taking a lot of energy from someone who already has very little of it, and a lot of my time. But I'm in the closing stages of this thesis. So once that is done, once I graduate, and I will have far more time to dedicate to the things that I really am excited to talk about. And hopefully you guys will enjoy those conversations as well. But in the meantime, I appreciate everybody's support and the fact that you've stayed with us for this long. And I love you guys. And thanks again for your continued support with what we're doing. I think our next show should probably be, I think, Friday or Saturday, and I think Jim Mike will be back with us. I hope everyone here, everyone watching, has a great rest of your week. And I'll answer one more question. Critter asks, can you hint at your thesis? Yeah, so my thesis, I'm basically doing a analysis, a philosophical and historical analysis of postmodernism. So where it arises, and the flaws and strengths of the postmodern approach. I think it started out as a positive mindset to kind of move away from a very naive way of thinking about science and what can be said about knowledge. And then, like most movements or perspectives tend to do, it spiraled and became an extreme caricature of itself, to where people now are putting doubt that language isn't capturing anything about reality, that it even makes sense to talk about things as truth, that everything now is a construction, which I think is completely self-defeating and absolute nonsense. And so I'm looking into those questions in multiple spheres. Like I'm looking at it from a point of view of language. I'm looking at it from a point of view of science. I'm looking at it from a point of view of moral philosophy, and where I think what postmodernism became, why I think that fails and defeats itself in the long run. So that is basically my thesis in a nutshell, and I'll elaborate more on that as I finish it up and I actually complete it, and hopefully get it published. And I have a number of things in the works that I'm looking to potentially get published if I'm lucky enough. So we'll see how that goes. But having said that, thanks again, everyone, for joining in tonight, and I hope you enjoyed this live stream. When I'm by myself, I always feel like I'm rambling too much or stuttering a little bit. I kind of do these off. No, I mean, not off the fly, because I actually had to prepare to do this, but it's very hard for me when I don't have other people to sort of bounce back off of. And I'm kind of, until I get a more reliable setup, I'm a little bit apprehensive to do shows with guests just on my own, because I'm always worried that my internet is going to die on me, and then the guests will just be left there, be like, what do we do? So as opposed to, if when Mike is there, if my internet collapses, well, I know that he has my back, and vice versa. And thank you so much for the donation. Thank you. That means so much. He wrote, "Thank you, Scenes. I hope you can make an episode on mythos and logos. I tend to base my life on narratives. I do not take religious stories as a fact." Absolutely. That is something that I've looked into, and definitely a topic that I plan on engaging with in the future. Because like I said, and I may differ from a lot of atheists on that issue, where I don't think that there is not any value to be found in mythology or even religion or in those stories. I'm okay with that being kind of a framework for conversation. I just think that what matters is that people remember the context in which we're having those conversations, and that people are careful with the baggage that those terms have in society, and that we are aware of those things. So having said that, I'm going to close the show. Thanks again, everybody. If you like this video, subscribe and like and all those things. So I will see you guys again soon, and take care.